So this is a response video to David Long, and after finishing the commentary that I wrote, I realized that I'm probably never going to do this again. I think it's pointless. It turns out that he's not in stage green, he's in stage orange. And as you go through this, you'll see for yourself. So the first thing he says is reality is primary, comes first, and then consciousness is emergent, which means comes out of. So the first thing I want to establish is this is false. He does not factor in convergence or manifestation as a property of or format for formation or creation. He doesn't realize he's thinking in dualistic terms, okay? Or from the only perspective that he has. So how do we know that, he says? And it's not vice versa. How do we know it's not vice versa too? Reality is primary. So he says phenomenology, epistemic primary, I think, therefore I am. Simple English, how do we know we are conscious? First thing we know is that we exist. So Eckhart Tolle is what he meant by that. The next thing is upper left quadrant exists because we know we are conscious. This is what he says. Then the problem is other minds, because I, David Long, he's saying, would have to learn other languages and about other cultures. So I wrote in my notes, what is he saying? Seems the idea of relative languages from different cultures implies a different belief system. Basic stage green relativism. Okay, this is what you do after you pass orange. So he's starting the process to green and not starting the process to yellow. But this logically proves there are other minds who know things I do not know, he wrote. So this is not in reference to psychic awareness per se, but he's saying because we speak in different languages, we relate to the world differently. So it's nothing to do with skills that like psychic capacity, which I know for sure everyone agrees with, you gain in stage turquoise and existed in stage purple. This has to do with just different ways of thinking. So you know that he's in orange or green. Okay, so I made a mistake. Either he was dragged because he rushed through blue, maybe his parents were Christian, I'm not sure. But something happened where he has tidbits of like early yellow and some green, a lot of green that he's accessing, but it's mostly the end of orange, it appears. All right. It's safe to say that other beings exist, he wrote. So I wrote, this is confusing. Is he speaking about solipsism? Because that wasn't even hinted in his way of speaking. Unless he means ETs. I wasn't sure. No, and then I said to myself, he means epistemically. That's the only confused explanation. But then I'm confused. I thought he just said, I think, therefore I am in the upper left quadrant. We just established everyone existed. And now he's disagreeing with his own premises, which is okay, I guess. But how can you form a logical conclusion if you're completely contradicting yourself? The next thing is he said, we know there are other minds. We know that we exist. We exist in a shared context. Okay, so he's actually referring to solipsism, but that wasn't clear in the beginning of his video. Okay, so the next thing he says is hypotheses, shared objective reality. Ideas are thrown out like non-contradictions. We have fundamental assumptions and test them with science and peer review. Peer review shows reality is objective and consistent. This is what he wrote. And in my notes, in response, in other words, because we have a method, it proves our science is correct. But he doesn't tackle the problem of the finger can't point to itself. Clearly, he's never done psychedelics, which means he's going to be teaching theory for the rest of his life and teaching from that basis until he has an awakening of some kind. But this is how we can build together over time, he wrote. Makes sense, I'm saying, we reflect off of each other to understand our own reality. But he's not coming from a place of interdependence, of philosophy and science itself, of perception itself. He does not factor in reality as a byproduct of what your peers are actually going to say in the future about so-called objective reality. Because it's that future belief which is what actually shapes it for the collective body. Because time isn't linear. So then he wrote, peer review works. So I was like, that's biased. Peer review is a team of scientists claiming they are witnesses to the same thing. Like Moses on the mountain even. They all see the same results without questioning how consciousness actually causes those results to form. The basis is never understood if you simply say or accept peer review as a proper foundation, since we can somehow connect it to the upper left quadrant, despite it being just as plausible to be in the other quadrants. Despite it being just as plausible to be in other quadrants, like it, because a collective mind or body forms the basis of truth in material reality, or its, because it's those systems which help solidify those truths, and we, because it's the world view that shapes the it, which shapes the perception and perspective. But he's not even considering those three, which are actually more probable, and saying what he's talking, peer review is referring to the I. So it's out of hand. He's not even speaking integral. He's making his own thing up. He's creating integral from an orange lens. And I'm going to get to that later in a second. Minute 508, he says, psychic reality is another component to the non-rational world, and it does not make sense. Right? So I wrote, but we know, because he starts listing a bunch of things that are not in the rational world, but we know some people have these abilities, using various energies to manipulate, certain energies that come out of the body, and what the mind can do, right? But David Long would immediately call these Tai Chi masters who can light paper on fire, with their hands, as just swindlers. They're fakes, without even looking at the evidence. Because he already starts off by presuming a whole slew of things are not in the rational category. So this is an indication of stage orange thinking, which means he probably adopts more of the V meme of orange than he does even green. But consciousness is one of those things going on in reality that we can study, he proceeds to say. He misses the point that it's very hard to study consciousness, specifically because it takes stepping outside of conventional thinking, while claiming consciousness somehow goes under the rational category because it can be studied. That's his premise. But it can only be studied because it takes a first-hand experience to get outside of consciousness, which means it's not in the rational category as he implies, even if he will say it goes under the upper right quadrant, which he won't because he already connected it to the upper left quadrant. Claims evolution is, and he'll respond to that, it'll go into multiple quadrants. Maybe he'll even agree with my 8 quadrants to help himself understand it. But no, he just contradicted himself, and he'll need an excuse to figure out why. Claims evolution is a fact and true, simplistic, 8 octants, not quadrants. Claims evolution is a fact and true, simplistic take that adopts the orange lens. He does not factor in basic principles you discover in tier 2, like convergence, a polarity as shaping a singular frame to give you seemingly one picture despite coalescing angles. Okay? In terms of the absolute truth of reality, we need to... this is what he wrote. In terms of the absolute truth of reality, we need to be hard agnostics, which is a contradiction because he's actually more atheist. We'll get to that soon. Reality is probably much more strange than we can imagine. So he agrees that there's a possibility of strangeness. So if you do psychedelics, he'll probably say, yeah, I'll probably experience some strange things. He has enough open-mindedness to agree with that and not to say the psychedelic journey is a waste of time. So eventually he's going to take psychedelics. He's going to realize everything we're saying is true. And then what is he going to do in his video? Change his whole thesis? I mean, he, all these years, changes everything he built up. It's going to be a difficult challenge to admitting that he'd been wrong all this time. Right. So 918, he wrote, I appreciate him being in... I wrote, he brings in this nice Big Bang chart. I was like, wow, I really appreciate him bringing in the Big Bang. But when you don't come in with the foundation of turquoise, when you don't come with the foundation that reality is literally contributed by how you will choose to see something in the future, then it makes it mundane. It takes away the holiness or the mystical tone behind the facts of the Big Bang. When you have an agenda to end off the exploration under the rationalist lens, believing it's expansive, believing that's what expansiveness means, it pollutes the whole exploration of knowledge itself. So consciousness on other planets would still be an emergent product of reality in those contexts as well. This is what he said. I agree. However, a bigger question will be, why does it seem so rare? Instead of saying the universe is huge and we got lucky to be created, perhaps you can say we simply haven't adopted the right perspective to allow for that creation in our collective consciousness. That is to say, We simply haven't allowed a certain perspective which causes specific creations to form, like the revelation of ETs. It's we creating it, but it's also allowing that material matter to have been true in the past itself. The collective ego structure will allow that. That's found in other videos of mine. But he's nowhere near understanding that because he's a materialist orange. 1058, I wrote, there is a difference between the roots and the fruits, and they should not be conflated. In different words, David Long is saying emergent properties or the emergent creations out of reality are of no significance since they are offshoots. But that's the materialist paradigm of cause and effect. He's using our species' own linear thinking to ascertain truth and thinking those premises can help him escape the thinking cycle for how to derive truth or how truth forms itself at all. Meaning you need to reach stage turquoise to adequately talk about spiral dynamics and get taken seriously by Ken Wilber or those in tier 3 in general. So David Long is the perfect example for how to understand spiral dynamics, how to understand creation, philosophy, consciousness through a linear stage orange lens. He's using the scientific lens to prove that humans don't have a source of consciousness at 1147, and I found that to be humorous. That the word integral is in his video. I guess it's okay if you're in stage green and are trying to begin integral work, but that's about it. Consciousness is a very new thing in our universe that requires certain equipment to even exist. This is literally stage orange materialistic paradigm 101. It does not get any more self-explanatory than at 12:18 in his video. God did it is a lazy answer, says David Long. So even though technically he's right, to dismiss a wisdom or prior consciousness or intelligence that brings forth complex conscious creations, it's not lazy. It's actually the most logical conclusion. We don't think it is in stage orange because we have a materialistic lens, but once you transcend stage turquoise, another transcendent zone, you realize that's the only logical explanation. There's some kind of force that's aligning us a particular way. That there are other facets to reality and how it shapes itself. To dismiss that is just stage orange thinking. So it's more logical to think that there's some kind of intelligence, whatever you want to call it. I had an atheist teacher who believes in some kind of intelligence that's controlling things, but he doesn't call it God, and he doesn't want people to call it God. And he worked at Harvard. And his whole life he was atheist, but he realized that there's no way that my life could be set up the way it is unless there's some kind of controller or an intelligence guiding everything. So this is not to call it God, but David Long would say what your Harvard atheist professor said, and God did it as equal. So he has no discrimination in how he thinks. There's a lot of discernment problems that happens in stage orange and green. Okay, early green especially. And Mr. Long will say to me, you don't understand that the graph of nonlinear means I can be at any place, anytime, and it doesn't mean I am more or less evolved. Besides for misunderstanding the graph itself, since there is a progression outwards, he also does not understand that the complex progression of development has even more angles than what Ken Wilber was talking about. And later on, I realized he does realize there's more angles, but he says it in a way that's not coherent. Maybe he watched my Octant video, I'm not sure, and that needs to be looked into. And is surprised that Ken Wilber does not respond to his stage orange rants spoken at almost every university on Earth. Meaning most university professors are going to be speaking the way he speaks. Not in terms of intelligence, but in terms of theme. That's why they get hired, because they have a certain theme. And then eventually they advance, and that's when they start teaching good stuff, and then they have to be careful with how they teach. Nested quadratic holarchies. Sometimes certain quadrants are nested inside other quadrants. This is what he said. So this is reasonable. The complexity of this facet is why I started the 4DOM model, the Fordham model, or whatever you want to call it. Oh, the Fordham project. That's what I'm starting to calling it lately. So we have a comprehensive factoring of all overlapping and unseen areas via a given transitionary point. As of now, I don't know if adjacent octants will be negative or positive or reciprocal, but that will be figured out later once we put in the the points once we plug in everything. The whole video is a thesis with very little evidence except some basic pointers from Stage Orange's lens. He then says he knows he doesn't have a map for how matter became conscious, but that's not the purpose of this video. I highly doubt he will have any such map beyond "we got lucky," and then throw out something like the archaic anthropic principle. Like he'll just throw that out there, but not really have a detailed analysis, except just repetition, because there's not much to say on it except just vague ideas that you memorize. But this video teaches he's not thinking deeply about what he knows. He's just repeating stuff that he hears. But this video teaches that we know things through our epistemic primary, as in we think through our consciousness. 1528. This is what he wrote. Okay. He proceeds to say, my point here is that idealists can't make this case. They don't have a clear logical path of consciousness as the epistemic primary. Then I added, which is wrong. It's so primitive of a knowledge, it doesn't need to be said after stage turquoise. It's a given. To the idea that consciousness is the cosmological primary. In simple terms, the idea that consciousness comes from the cosmos or universe, meaning he's the one with the epistemic contradictions. His response will be, you have to start somewhere. The rational world in this is the most rational way to understand. No, that's based on a linear logical presumptive plane, which is not agreed upon by scientists, especially once factoring in nonlinear discussions, like quantum mechanics, how reality forms in respect to the observer. Then he said, they basically conflate these two ideas, consciousness and cosmology. So I wrote, that's a simplistic take on what non-dualists do. Rather, we understand that once you know that the two are one, you can skip steps. You don't need a process towards any conclusion because all paths are correct. A linear step-by-step process is for a degree of awareness much lower down in the spiral, or in integral terms, in the non-causal zone or the it material zone, that most people talking about integral have far surpassed. This is just the reality. He wrote, my challenge for any idealist who might want to debate me. First, the word idealist is meant as a conflationist term for anyone who disagrees with him on this rationalistic perspective. The next thing is debating people doesn't make you smarter, it makes you more narrow and closed-minded. Get your priorities straight, David Long. Discuss, if anything, and not to talk, but to get to the facts. The truth, that you have no idea why you are conscious, and it probably has something to do with the knife not being able to cut itself. I highly recommend you listen to Alan Watts for a few years and try some psychedelics. He also puts conditions on this debate by saying, first you have to have a logical argument, which means he's not even willing to adopt your presumptions for the sake of humoring people he disagrees with. So this is a talent learned in stage yellow, which he clearly has not touched upon in any significant way. What he really means is you have to be a rationalist atheist who doesn't believe in a God but goes under the category of agnostic and also has a rational argument that agrees with all of my premises and only contradicts in small ways. Then I will debate you. Because otherwise you're not smart enough. Get out of here. He calls anyone who thinks different from him an idealist. They're saying that I was too rough. Okay. So we'll start over. What he really means is you have to be a rationalist atheist who doesn't believe in a God, but goes under the category of an agnostic, and also has a rationalistic argument, but a rational argument that agrees with my premises, but only contradicts in small ways and not big ways. Then I will debate you. Because otherwise, you're not smart enough. That's basically what he says in different words, and it's a paraphrase that's so clear if you're objective and you just watch it. He calls anyone who thinks different from him an idealist. then what is a non-idealist? It's literally talking to a brick wall, basically. He dismisses abstract thinking, intuitive capacity, factored in by even statistical analyses, and anything that defies his own specific logical criteria for how to argue as an academic. So basically, this guy is going to be talking to a wall for the rest of his life. Bye. See you. Commenting on your videos is a waste of time. I highly recommend you watch my video several times to know the truth, and you won't have to ever look at his videos. Take care. All the best. Bye.